Race family, guys, I hope you're all doing amazing and staying safe. It's been a crazy month and a half or 2 months or so with the quarantine. I really wanted life to go back to normal and back to big racing events at the track, cars and coffee, the car shows, a lot of the stuff we do for, I guess, for fun on this channel. There hasn't been any of that, and I've been kind of just sitting around. I haven't filmed any videos for you guys. What we're doing today, I should have done a lot sooner, but it's never too late. I've decided to make a series of videos. I get a lot of questions from you guys on Instagram, on Facebook, even on some of these YouTube videos, where you guys are always asking me questions on my current setup on the car. And if you guys know me, I'm always super transparent. I love helping you guys with your builds, your cars. I've owned this Supra for about 8.5 years now, and it's kicked my butt throughout that time. But little by little, I've met a lot of amazing people that have guided me and helped me along the way, a lot of amazing shops and friends, and anything that I've learned that I can share with you guys, I'm all for it. Today's topic, I think, is the most important one, the one that I get the most. It's questions on the fuel system that I currently have. And I figured, you know what, if I'm going to talk about the fuel system that I have now, might as well talk about the other 2 or 3 stages or evolutions of fuel systems that I had leading up to this. And the reason I had all those different fuel systems is initially when I built this car, when I started going single turbo and doing things to it, I bought it all original. When I started building it, I wanted 800 horsepower. I wanted to kind of push the limits of the factory bottom end. So 800, 900, 850, or in that ballpark. So I had a fuel system for that. Then a little later, I think I had my first built motor, and I wanted around 1,000. I changed up the fuel system for that kind of power, and little bit there was probably another one, and that led me to my 1,400 horsepower big Weldon fuel pump that I have now. Big injectors. We'll walk through it, guys, and I love the system that's in here now, and I'm sure you guys will like it as well. And any questions, feel free to write them below. Feel free to ask for any, I guess, the next video, whatever the next video. I have a lot of other ideas in mind, parts and things that I can talk to you guys about on the build. But if you guys have any particular ones, make sure to share it down below, and maybe I'll shoot that video next. All right, let's get right into it, guys. All right, guys, let's start from the beginning. My very first fuel system. Like I mentioned earlier, I bought the car all original, and I actually enjoyed it even with the stock twins. I did full exhaust, an intercooler, basic stuff, and I had a lot of fun like that. But the second I wanted more power, I went to a single turbo, bone stock 2J. All I did was some head studs and a set of cams with stock valves, springs, obviously pistons, rods, crank. The whole motor was unopened. I never touched the oil pump, water pump, nothing. I left it 100% how it came. Head studs. I went to a bigger turbo, and I needed a fuel system to run E85 and turn the power up. So this is what I went with. I used the factory hanger. I basically opened up the fuel tank. I took out the factory pump, swapped it out for 1 Wobber 450, and then basically 2 Wobber 450. I put one where the factory hanger goes, and then I clamped another Wobber 450 right alongside it. So I had 2 Wobber 450s in tank, a -8 feed going to the engine, obviously, and a -6 return. I remember I bought a fuel rail. The injectors, I bought some Bosch, like I think they were like either 1250s or 1300cc injectors. They were really cheap, so all I could afford at the time. I think they were like $300 or $350. They were new. They were for E85, so I bought those injectors. Had a fuel rail. I had an Aeromotive fuel pressure regulator. If you're familiar with obviously the 2JZ, these fuel rails, an aftermarket fuel rail usually has like I guess an opening in the rear, the front, and in the center. I've always just plugged the center, and I feed the rail through the rear and then just return it from the front. That's actually the setup that I have now, and I've never had issues. So it's a lot less lines, a lot less fittings, it costs less, and it worked fine. And that was it, guys. It was very, very basic. We went straight to the dyno on E85. The car made, I forget all the stage now, but I think at 25 pounds, it was around 700 horsepower, and then we started cranking it up and up. It made like 799 at like 33 pounds, and it made 823 wheel on a dyno jet at 35 pounds of boost. At about 823 horsepower, that was just about as much fuel as the injectors are good for. At high RPMs, at around the 35 pounds of boost, the duty cycle was like 95, 96%. They were really just maxed out. And I remember my tuner, we took the car off the dyno, and he brought it down like 2 or 3 pounds. Basically gave me the car at like 32 pounds. The injector duty cycle was maybe high 80s or so, and he said that was fine. And I ran the car like that. I won a lot of races, and then shortly after lost a few. And I remember wanting more power, but not really, I guess, having the funds to rework the fuel system, buy new injectors. I didn't want to have to retune. I wanted to leave things like they were. And I'll actually mention this little tip as well. Some of you guys might be maxing out your injectors, and this might work for you guys. So I get this question a lot too. I'm not a tuner. I don't tune the car. I use Lance. My standalone in the car has always been an AEM version 2. Lance is an amazing tuner, but from an early stage, I did learn how to adjust boost by speed, how to do minor adjustments on my own. So check this out. So again, the duty cycle was like, call it 95%. The injectors were pretty much maxed out at 35 pounds of boost at higher PM. It'll take 35 pounds of boost, mid-range RPM, no issue. But once it saw the 7,500, I used to spin this motor 8,000 RPM, stock valve, springs, stock everything. And when it saw that 7,800, 7,900, that's when the duty cycle would get really high. So what I started to do was to win more races and be more competitive. I remember running the boost even higher in the mid-range. So instead of that 32 pounds they turned me down to, or even the 35, I would run like 38 or 39 pounds in that mid-range. When I say mid-range, I mean the 4,500, 5,000, 6,000, even like 7,000 RPMs. And the second the car would get to like 7,000 RPMs, I would start tapering the boost back down to the 34, 35 pounds of boost. And I would do most of this by boost by speed. But it worked great. It allowed me to run more boost and get away with that current fuel system. So again, it might work for some of you guys. If you want to talk about it with your tuners, I encourage it. I'm not a tuner, but I like taking risks, man. I like going fast. It's something that I would do. I would run more boost in the mid-range and just bring it down to not really run the injectors to the very, very limit, or not over that 100% duty cycle. So that was my first system. I ran about, maybe saw around 850 wheel horsepower or so, 830, 840, 850, and it was a blast. Shortly after that, I wanted more power. I ended up going to the injectors that I have now. So I upgraded, right? So that was the first fuel system. The second fuel system, I wanted more power. So about a year or so of running it that way, I went to the Siemens Deca's 2200cc injectors. That's what I use in the car till today. I've had them for like 6 years. I occasionally get them cleaned at least once a year. I'll take them to get a clean, new O-rings, to get them refreshed. But I've never, ever, ever experienced any issues with these injectors. They're inexpensive compared to some of the competitors, and they work great. They flow amazing. So that's what I recommend. So I went to these injectors, and I remember I used an MSD like booster pump for the fuel pumps. So I did that, and it worked great. So I would consider that, let's say, my stage 2, right, a fuel system. So now I still had the 2 Wabra 450s in tank with an MSD booster pump. I forget if it boosted both or just one, but it helped. It helped for extra power. I started making close to like 900 wheels, still stock motor. Consider that my second fuel system setup. So it was still pretty similar to what I started with. Same fuel line, same fuel pressure regulator, same rail, but now I upgraded the injectors and I added a booster pump to the pumps. It helped me make additional power. It worked great. Again, probably good for around 900 wheel or so. After that, I decided to build the motor. It was an original motor before then, but I went to Real Street Performance. I had them build me a badass engine, and it was time to turn the power up. So back to the fuel system, I needed more fuel. All right, guys, so stage 3, the third fuel system that I went through in this car. A lot of times I didn't really change every little piece, but I would make upgrades. So I'm gonna make it into stages or different setups for you guys to kind of tell you guys the power I was making, how fast the car was running, and kind of just walk you through it better. But now I had a built motor by Real Street Performance. It was time for more fuel, and to deliver that extra fuel, I called up Powerhouse Racing and I bought their badass billet triple pump setup. So I actually bought 3 new pumps, 3 new Wabra 450s. The other 2 weren't that old, but you never want to risk it, guys. So I bought 3 Wabra 450s. I got rid of the MSD booster pump. I was no longer using that setup. I upgraded to a -10 feed, a -8 return, same injector, same fuel pressure regulator, same rail. There goes another plane, so allow me 1 second. All right, guys, on the turbo that was in the car made 950 wheel horsepower. And as soon as I made that power, I went straight to the track. At 950 wheel horsepower, that set up my first built motor. I would have pushed it more, but the turbo I think was good for about that much power. We went to the track. I couldn't believe it. My first pass was like a 930 or so. Then we went a 9.1. Then we went an 890. It was my first time ever running 8s. I couldn't believe it. And the next pass, we cranked it up a little more. Again, same power. We were just bringing in the power a little more aggressive. I was leaving a little more aggressive. And the car ran an 870 at 159 miles an hour, making it the fastest Supra at the time, right, in the world with the built auto trans, the original auto trans, which is very, very neat. Was a lot of fun. I ran it like that for a long time until I upgraded the turbo and kept going and going and going, and eventually needed more fuel and more power. But that system was probably one of the ones that I kept for the longest. It worked amazing. The only downfall, I'll tell you guys what it is now. Some of these planes are pretty quiet and some are crazy loud, man. Some got some high performance exhaust, baby. All right guys, so I was saying the triple pump setup, that fuel system that supported the power. Actually, it was making 950 there. I swapped the turbo, I cranked it up some more. That fuel system, I made like probably around 1200 wheel, no issue whatsoever. The only, I guess, downfall side of, the only one thing I disliked about that fuel system is the triple pump setup will support it will support the power you need. The only downside is anytime I would go drag racing, I wanted to run the car as light as possible. So I remember there was times I would try to make a quarter-mile hit on half a tank of gas or a quarter tank of gas. Forget that. With the triple pump setup, the car would leave so hard. This car was 60 foot, like a 129 60 foot. The car would leave so hard, I guess in the factory tank, there'll be like fuel slush or the fuel move around, and almost every time the pumps would cavitate. So the car would take off really strong, and then you'll feel it break up. It just had no fuel in it. And Supras have a basket in which the pumps sit in, but even then, guys, the fuel would leave that basket, would get pushed to the back of the tank, and every time, right past the 60 foot, the car would lose power, and I would have to lift and let off. So I went an 870, I went an 860 with more power down the road, but all those passes were always on pretty much a full tank of gas. So again, that fuel system was great for making the power, but I disliked the fact that I had to run on a full tank of gas. These Supras, I forget the size of the tank exactly, the factory tank, but it's at least 15, 16 gallons. There's a large tank, and each gallon of fuel, look up online what the weight of a gallon of fuel is, but I want to say it's probably like 8 or 9 pounds. So 8 or 9 pounds times 15 gallons, you're carrying over 100 pounds of fuel for nothing. So that led me to this fuel system. So again, nothing against that other one. It supported the power, but I wanted to run and compete with this the least weight possible. So we'll talk about this fuel system and why I set it up the way that I did after this plane. All right, guys, so that brings me to the fuel system that we have now. I'll walk you guys through the car and I'll show you the car. If you guys follow the channel, you guys know that I drive this thing a lot. I love driving it. It's got AC. I drive it everywhere. Just a few months ago, I drove it to 3 different tracks. Let me see, 3 different tracks. I put 1,000 miles in 3 days, and I love having the factory tank. I knew that that would be something I wanted to do. So doing like a fuel cell for, let's say a 5-gallon fuel cell, that's great for saving weight, but then you can't freaking go 250 miles from home. It wouldn't have been convenient. I gotta be filling it up nonstop. So keeping the factory tank was always a must for me. So, but again, keeping the weight savings in mind, I decided to go with the surge tank. So I want to show you guys how I did that. I called PHR again. I sold my triple pump setup, and I bought another PHR billet hanger that they sell that you can pretty much configure that thing any which way you want. So what I did was, I have 1 Wobbler 450 in tank now. So I went from having 2 from the very beginning to having 3 to now only having 1. I have 1 Wobbler 450 in tank with a special PHR billet hanger. This billet hanger has a filter in the tank, so the pump blows right through a filter and out of the tank. It leaves the tank here. So check this out. I can turn this little light on, hope it helps. All right, so this thing is pretty, isn't it? All right, so this is my factory fuel tanks underneath there. This is the factory lid. I just made a small little cutout on the side to get the fuel lines out. So I got the PHR billet hanger in here now, 1 Wobbler 450. It blows through a filter and it comes out. It comes out with a -10 line. So this -10 line feeds this how do you pronounce this? Radium fuel surge tank that I have here. Let me see if you guys can see it well. This is the largest one they sell, guys. This is the largest radium fuel tank, little fuel surge tank that they sell, and it's empty inside. It's just fuel. There's no pumps inside this tank. So if I walk you guys through it quickly, this is the dash 10 feed. That's the Wilder 450 coming out of this big tank. It feeds a dash 10 right over here, and that's filling the tank up. As the tank gets to the top, I have a dash 8 return. So as it fills up, it returns right back again, right to this main tank. I hope that's clear. So I open the ignition, this little pump turns on, it starts filling this tank up. Once it gets to the top, it comes right back out. So this tank is always filled to the top. And then I got a dash 10 feed coming out of the tank here in the center. It's a pickup. It comes out of there and it goes to a Weldon pump. I have a Weldon 23, I think it's called like an A2345. It's got a crazy name, but it's the big Weldon pump. I have one underneath the car. And it takes right out of this dash 10 line, and it feeds the fuel rail on the front with a dash 10 feed. Guys, this fuel system is amazing. I love it. I can get away. A lot of times I'm driving the car around, you guys are telling me I'm on low fuel, my fuel light is on. That's how I like to drive it, man. I want the car to be lightweight. Even when I compete at the track, I race at the track with my light on. So there's probably 2 or 3 gallons in the main tank. That little tank there is filled, so I probably run with 3 or 4 gallons at most in the whole car, instead of before I was running with 15 or 14 gallons. So it definitely saves some weight, and saving weight is nice to all your parts, as well as your car is faster because there's less weight involved. So I'll show you guys the front now before I go back there and talk to you guys more about the fuel system back there. But I now have a Hypertune intake manifold, just one rail, guys. I'm making 1400 horsepower with one fuel rail with 6 injectors. There's no twin rails, there's no 12 injector setup. All right, so the dash 10 line that comes out of that surge tank that's in the rear goes down, it feeds the Weldon. I have another fuel filter towards the front, so the Weldon comes, there's one more fuel filter right underneath here. You can actually see it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it here, but it's right down there. You can see the fuel filter, and then it feeds the rail in the rear. Like I said earlier, the center is plugged, so there's nothing coming out of the center. It feeds in the rear, it feeds the whole rail, all the injectors, and then it returns in the front. You see the 90-degree there, it goes to my fuel pressure regulator, which is also a Weldon regulator now, and then it returns back to the main tank. So from the fuel pressure regulator here, I returned it back to the main tank. The reason I did it that way, guys, is once the fuel has made it to the engine, has gone through your rail, has gone through the front, it's really hot in the engine compartment. Once it's there, that fuel is returning back a lot hotter. I don't want to put that hot fuel in my fuel surge tank, because then all this fuel will get crazy hot. So instead, I throw it back into the main tank where it can cool down some and then go back through the whole cycle I just explained. So I know it can be a little tricky, a little confusing. There's lots of different steps. But if you guys have questions, comment them down below. I'll do my best to respond. And now we'll talk about the other tricks and things that I have going on here. So after this plane. All right, guys, so along with the setup that I just described, one Wilder 450 is just, all it's doing is filling up my surge tank. The car makes power on the big Weldon pump. But I don't only run the Weldon pump. I have that's all I use, but I have a booster pump on top of that big pump. So that big pump can probably already support the power that I need, but we have a booster pump on top of it. I used to run an MSD booster pump before, but now I have a Kennebel. This has Kennebel Boost a Spark, but the Boost a Spark and Boost a Pump, same thing. When I went to some Mustang store looking for a Boost a Pump, this is all they had, and I bought it. I use JR wiring for all my wiring needs, and he wired it in. It works great. So once the car sees boost, that Boost a Pump comes on top of the big Weldon, and it raises the voltage to the Weldon, supporting even more power. And I think that's the reason why I'm getting away with only 6 injectors and making the power I make. So when the car was on the dyno about a year ago, it dynoed 1336 to the tire. That was like 60% duty cycle through only 6 injectors. That's crazy. And I think the reason it's doing that, we don't run a crazy high base pressure. My base pressure now is like 45 or so pounds, and then 1 pound per pound of boost. But I feel like I'm getting away with so much power because of that booster pump. It really, really helps. So I have that. And then some of you guys might be thinking, man, he's got that big electric pump. That thing is probably crazy loud. And you're right, it was, but we got something to control that as well. So again, I went back to JR wiring, and if you look here, we got a Weldon. This device that you see here, this is a Weldon, I guess like a voltage regulator as well. What that does is I actually have a knob, and I can bring the voltage or the power down on the pump, making it a lot quieter and easier to drive and live with. So I'll show you guys what that looks like now. Check this out. All right guys, much better. So this dial that you see here, this knob, this controls the voltage to the pump. So again, those pumps can be very loud for street driving. So with that controller there, I can make it really quiet and easy and tame to drive around with. I also like that because it doesn't warm up the fuel. You don't have tons of fuel just running throughout the whole car for nothing. That just heats up the fuel when you're not needing it right there and then. So I turn this down a lot, and then right before I race, I crank it all the way up. I believe JR Wiring, who helped me wire this in, also mentioned that even if I forget to turn it up, once it sees boost, it's going to turn it up on its own. But I always like doing it myself. So I'll start the car now. Look, check this out. I'll start the car with the pump all the way up. So this is the power all the way up. Listen to how loud that pump can be. It'll drive you crazy. Yeah, that's loud. So I used to drive around like that, and it got annoying really fast. So now by having that regulator, check how I can lower it. Like I'm gonna try to just hit the key again without the car coming on, just so you can hear how much quieter it is. So this is how I typically have it when I street drive, how it is now. In many cases, I can hear the 1 Wobber 450 in tank, in the factory tank, even more so than hearing the big pump underneath the car. So that thing's a must-have. Check this out. Here we go. You could barely hear it. It'll turn right on. So that's how I have it on the street. It's really quiet, and then right before a race, I can crank the dial and it screams. All right, guys, I'll give you one last demonstration. This is, let me see. This is me turning on the car with the pump. I'll start it with the pump all the way up, and then I'll start bringing it down so you can hear the difference. That's all the way up, and look. Listen to how quiet that got. So you can cruise around with the quiet pump. By doing this setup, you'll have more than enough fuel for beyond 1400 wheel horsepower. So you'll have a lot of fuel for a lot of power. You can bring the pump down, and it's nice and tame to drive on the street. You can get away with using a lot less fuel in your factory tank. You can keep the factory tank and still save weight, not have to go to a fuel cell. So I hope some of this stuff helps you guys. I'll give you guys one more walk around, show you guys the car. Again, I hope it helps. If you guys have any questions, write them down below. If you guys have any ideas, let's say for the next video, whichever part you guys want me to talk about. All right, some of the things I want to talk about next are things like an ABS delete. I remember when I decided to go ABS delete, I was on the fence. Is it a good idea, a bad idea? But I'll give you guys my honest opinion in a future video. ABS delete, power steering delete. I went with the Granos Racing manual rack. We'll talk about that. I took out the sway bar in the front. We can talk about that. Going with skinnies, I remember that being like a big debate that I would consider, do I go with skinnies, do I not? How's the car gonna react to drive on the street? Is it crazy? And I did it. I went to skinnies. We'll talk about that. My ATF built transmission, I love that thing. We'll talk about that as well. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you have any questions, write them down below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later, guys.